And for like, especially my families are busy, especially nowadays. And the act of meal planning is, it can be really stressful. And so I just say, like, let's break it down to your 3 meals a day. Let's make a plate. I have people make a circle on their page, and then let's have your fruits and your vegetables and your grains and maybe some form of protein, whether it be mixing that grain with legumes or putting an egg or chicken on that plate too. And that's kind of how we design these plates. And then once people start to do that, I can break down the science for them. And I can say, by having these 3 really well balanced meals and maybe a snack in there, depending on your activity level, they see that they're meeting all of their nutrient needs, their family's nutrient needs, and they don't need to be as concerned. They can be more intuitive.
Welcome to the Wise Consumer Podcast, the answer to your eco-friendly and healthy lifestyle questions. How to reduce your exposure to harmful chemicals, whether or not it's normal to have a painful period, how to live an eco-friendly lifestyle on a budget, and more. With the help of experts, I'm talking scientists, toxicologists, endocrinologists, cosmetic chemists, you'll get knowledge and know-how to your most pressing health concerns and sustainability questions straight from the source. I'm Madeline Weisskopf, your host, confidant, and in-house science nerd, here on a mission to help empower, inspire, and support you in your own health and eco journey. Because, friend, I am a firm believer that if you don't feel good, you can't do good. So, pour yourself a cup of tea, kick off your shoes, take a deep breath, and let's get started. Hello, friend. I am so glad you're here and taking time to tune in to today's episode because, well, it's a good one. But before we dive in, I wanted to take a few minutes to update you on a few things. More specifically, I wanted to share that this is the last guest episode of season 3. Can you believe it? This season has flown by. It's been so much fun sharing all of these conversations with you, and I really hope you've enjoyed learning and hearing from all the guests I've brought on. Now, I'll still be releasing a few solo episodes between now and season 4, which I'll be launching in June, but this is the last guest episode until then. So if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes so you get notified as soon as I drop the first episode of season 4, which I'm already working on and cannot wait to share. Anyway, with that being said, let's get started. I often feel as a nutrition can get a bit confusing at times, right? I mean, there are constantly new diets and trends being advertised and thrown into our faces. Keto, intermittent fasting, cleanses, macro diet, paleo diet, carnivore diet, veganism, the list goes on. So with everything else going on in our lives, it's no surprise that most of us end up feeling a bit perplexed as to what a simple, nutritious, and wholesome diet actually looks like. But what if I told you it didn't have to be so confusing? If there's one thing my good friend and registered dietitian Kathleen Robins is really good at, it's taking the overwhelm out of nutrition and breaking it down in a way that's really easy to understand and implement in your daily life, which is exactly why I invited Kathleen to speak with us today on the podcast. Kathleen is a registered dietitian nutritionist, board certified in overweight and obesity, and a certified specialist in sports dietetics with more than 11 years of experience. Prior to launching Kathleen Robins Nutrition, her own nutrition counseling practice, Kathleen worked for the U.S. Army where she ran nutrition and medical administrative clinics, worked alongside fellow military dietitians to help heal wounded warriors returning home from Iraq and Afghanistan, and helped patients lose weight, fight cancer, and heal from transplants or heart attacks. Over the years, I have learned so much from Kathleen, and in full disclosure, as you'll hear in our conversation today, Kathleen and I are collaborating on a few different nutrition courses, which I am in the midst of creating and will be launching in the next few months. I am so excited about these courses, you guys, so stay tuned for more on that. But in the meantime, Kathleen is here to give us a super simple overview on all things protein, carbs, and intuitive eating. From how much protein you actually need per day to the difference between good and quote bad carbs. We also talk about what to eat pre and post workouts, the health benefits of eating eggs, the importance of a whole foods diet, and so much more. So without further ado, here's Kathleen. Kathleen, thank you so much for being on the Wise Consumer Podcast. I am so thrilled that you are here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Maddie. I'm really excited to be here today and talk to you about health and nutrition.
I know, one of our favorite topics, which for anyone listening, I've known Kathleen for a few years now. We met here in Washington, D.C. area. But for one of the things I always like for my listeners I want them to know who you are and how you got to where you are, Kathleen. So let's start at the beginning for you. How did you get to where you are today and get interested in nutrition?
Sure. Well, I guess, where I am today is kind of starting my own nutrition practice. And what led me there was really my 10 to 11 years of experience, both as active duty dietitian and then, transferring to the reserves as a dietitian. And the experience of being a generalist dietitian, doing, food service and taking care of inpatients in a hospital and various disease states, to really moving into the wellness sector and working with athletes and really that prevention piece. And it pushed me towards starting my own practice where I can help people be proactive in their own health rather than waiting for maybe a certain disease, comorbidity, taking them in to see a dietitian.
Right. So you worked for the Army as a nutritionist?
I did. Yep. I was a dietitian in the Army for active duty for 10 years. I started out my experience down in San Antonio, where I worked really with the guys and gals coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, working with amputees and burn victims. So that type of nutrition is more trauma related. Feeding very, very basic macronutrients, micronutrients, more in the form of like tube feeding or IVs. And then I moved slowly along in hospitals, wellness clinics, and even in academia towards that more wellness, whole foods, working with generally healthy people or athletes and getting them to their top performance with nutrition.
And when you were working with the wounded warriors and some of the burn victims, unfortunately burn victims, did you find that nutrition was a supportive, like a way to also help along their health journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything from the initial injury where, you have those ebbs and flows stages. And if you have someone who, like, let's say, was a burn patient, they have really, really high energy needs. And so making sure they have all that energy in order to heal. And then once they're kind of more in that healing rehabilitative process, using nutrition, again, just for overall health and wellness. Some of the things we used to do down in San Antonio is we'd take our wounded warriors and we'd have cooking classes with them because it's so important not just to be able to learn how to cook and healthy things, but to use cooking as, like a stress management tool or wellness.
Yeah, I love that. That's so great. Now you recently, well, thank you for your service, first of all. I just need to clarify that. But so you recently left the Army, you're working as a reserve, and now you've kind of shifted to helping individuals outside, like civilian and military, anyone basically who wants to use it. So just as a plug here for Kathleen, she is my consultant for all of the toolkits and the work that I'm doing with the Wise Consumer. So I'm like extremely honored, Kathleen, to be working and chatting with you. And I'm so glad our paths have connected.
Me too.
And obviously we could chat about so many different topics when it comes to nutrition and health, because I'm super nerdy about it and you are like my nerd friend that I talk about it with. But one of the things, as we discussed, that I really would like to dive into is protein. Because I started really looking into how protein impacts our body as I started doing kind of like my vegan challenge and plant-based challenge. And then specifically after my miscarriage, I really started diving into how is nutrition supporting these amazing connections that are happening in my body that I'm not even aware of or wasn't aware of until like I started realizing like, ooh, I might be lacking in this or lacking in that. And I think the average person, we're not aware of the benefits of protein and how protein actually works within our body. So I'd like to start with that, like kind of like a protein 101 and why we need protein.
Yeah, great question. Um, so really the body structure of humans is built on protein. Um, Proteins differ from fat and carbohydrate because they have this molecular structure called an amine or a nitrogen. Proteins do everything from, building muscle to helping to make enzymes for critical functions in the body to helping make hormones, um, transport nutrients throughout the body, help with immunity. So very, very important from that sense. Proteins in the literal sense contain amino acids, which I think we're going to talk about in a little bit
Oh,
too.
yeah.
And those amino acids are linked by peptide bonds. And ultimately, what your protein is determined by is your DNA, so your genetic structure.
Break that down a little bit. What do you mean by that?
So your DNA tells us how those proteins are bound, and what amino acids proteins are made of, and then how they're composed of in your body. So what makes your eye color, what makes your hair color, is what the DNA then transcribes into how those proteins are built to make the actual structure of your body.
So, see, this is where I'm like blown away by protein because I think most of us think of protein like I'm going to eat protein because I'm going to be building muscle and getting strong. But I think we don't even realize like protein impacts so much, like our hormones, like you mentioned, which is how I really started looking into this because everybody knows I'm obsessed with hormones. But also in terms of immunity. And I'm curious, how is it that proteins can support all these different functions? How does it work?
No, that's a really great question, Maddie. So our DNA essentially tells different pieces of our body what proteins to make in order to function optimally.
Mm.
And so those proteins, let's say for your immune system, may say to make certain cells that transport antibodies to be able to help fight off a disease that comes. And so ultimately, I think that's the science that you're looking at is um, not just by eating protein and then the proteins, the DNA that we already have, how our cells are already built, is what helps everyday function in life. So we have our endogenous and exogenous protein.
Okay, explain it that.
Yep. So endogenous would be what's already in our body. So our muscles, our organs, versus exogenous is what we're eating every day.
So is that kind of where the essential versus non-essential proteins come into play?
Essential proteins are, yes, exactly, anything that our bodies can't make on its own. And
Mm-hmm.
so we would need to consume exogenously.
Got it. So let's talk about amino acids and essential proteins because I think this is where I was like mind blown. So we have, correct me if I'm wrong, about 20 different amino acids that our bodies need, 9 of which are essential, meaning our bodies can produce them, 12 of which are like our bodies can produce it. So would you say that's the endogenous?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yep.
Okay. So how do we get those? First, let me actually take it back. What are those essential proteins that our bodies need? What are those?
Yep. So they're called, actually, I can just list them for
Yeah,
you.
let's
So
list them.
histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine are all your essential amino acids that you must get exogenously because your body can't make endogenously from other carbohydrate and amine chains.
And what are the roles that these essential amino acids play?
So, a great question. So, those roles are really building those protein blocks. So, our DNA tells us you need so much of, let's take tryptophan. You need so much tryptophan to be able to help make that hormone that helps you to go to sleep, right? After your Thanksgiving meal.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the types of things that those essential amino acids work towards, is processes, hormones, building blocks for longer protein chains in your body in order to signal
Mm-hmm.
normal everyday growth. So I'm trying to think, I think a big one that you want to talk about with me is leucine.
Yeah.
And leucine is a branched chain amino acid that really helps to build muscle, specifically skeletal muscle. And so being maybe deficient in something like leucine, you might not be able to build as much skeletal muscle.
Yeah, because I had read somewhere, especially for women, because I guess we lose more muscle mass than it's harder for us to gain muscle than it is for men. And so, in one of the books I was reading by Dr. Stacy Sims, where she was talking, like, especially for women athletes, they should be incorporating more leucine. Um, and I was just curious, like, why? And that's when I started realizing, like, there's certain amino acids that I just didn't realize we need to be adding more of, or we don't need as much of. But I just never thought of protein in that way.
Right. And I think I wouldn't want your listeners to kind of be wrapped around, I need leucine, I
Mm-hmm.
need, methionine, I need all these amino acids. I'd want them to think about their diet as a whole, and
Mm.
that if they're getting good, complete proteins, whether that be in the animal form or that be in complementary proteins like rice and beans or lentil soup and a piece of bread, um, they would be getting all of the amino acids. And another thing too is if you are ultimately getting a well-balanced diet with all of your energy, so calorie needs, you're likely going to meet all of those amino acid needs anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would, again, I wouldn't want a very busy person that's,
Uh-huh.
they're listening to the podcast maybe while they're on their run or they're taking care of their kids, to have to think, I need to count my amino acids too.
Yeah, well, that's okay. That's actually really interesting because I was like, well, how would I even like that's one of my biggest thing when it comes to protein, which is why I want to talk about this. Like, I have a really hard time gauging how much protein should I be adding to my diet. How do I even make sure I'm getting the right amount of protein? And oh my gosh, am I adding leucine? Like, I went to my protein package and I was like, oh my gosh, is there leucine in this? Like, I need to make sure I'm getting leucine. Like I think it can get
Yeah.
really overwhelming. So how can we break it down for that busy woman or individual?
Yeah, no. Great question. So for the average individual, you really only need about zero point 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So for a 130-pound female, you only need about 50 grams of protein per day. Which, even looking at, say, like your yogurt, a lot of yogurts these days have 20 grams itself, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Of complete protein, all of the amino acids. So it's super
Mm,
easy that way if you break it down. Now, a lot of women are interested in maintaining weight or
mm-hmm,
maybe exercising um, for just mental health, the wellness benefit. And so as you increase exercise, you're going to increase the breakdown of your own skeletal muscle in order to, again, then break it up. So you need to make sure you're increasing protein there. And for someone that, say, maybe walking or yoga, more restorative, like low intensity exercise, we're looking at maybe 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram, which then, you're sitting at like 65 to 70 grams per day. Not a whole lot more, right?
mm-hmm.
And so, as we increase the intensity level of exercise, as we increase maybe the strength in that exercise, so you're really breaking down muscle and you need to build it up, that's when we increase protein intake even more to meet those demands. And so I probably wouldn't go above 2 grams per kilogram of protein. So when you look at that, that 130-pound woman, you're really not looking at more than like 110 grams per day, which is fairly easy to get. Yes.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that's confusing is we think we need to eat more protein and we have a hard time understanding, like, okay, so let's say you are, and you're talking about like 110 grams for like maybe like an Olympic athlete. The average person who's doing like a
Exactly.
30-minute workout doesn't need to be increasing their protein intake, right? Like to that
Exactly.
level. How do you gauge like, okay, well, actually I had a very intense workout or what felt like a very intense workout to me? Like how do you gauge like what you need?
Yeah. So I mean, you can gauge it a couple different ways. You can base that intensity off of maybe your heart rate.
Mm.
Um, you can, which, requires you to measure your heart rate. Another thing that I like to do is, if I'm not wearing a heart rate monitor, is gauging it off of um, whether I can speak during the exercise or not. And so if I can have a full on conversation with you about nutrition and protein while I'm running, it's probably low intensity. If I can't speak at all, it's probably at such an intensity that following that exercise, I would need to supplement with both carbohydrate and protein.
Okay, so for all the athletes listening here, I did want to ask you a few questions. I've heard that you should have protein before you work out, after you work out. How much should you eat before you work out? How much should you eat after you work out? And I'm talking about like an intense workout. Like let's say I'm training for a marathon or doing a high intensity interval workout.
So before you work out, to me, that means in the days and weeks leading
Mm,
up to your workout. So that's really increasing both protein and carbohydrate intake. One, the carbohydrate is going to give you that energy for that workout, say it's a marathon, and then the protein is going to help build up that skeletal muscle in order to make you bigger, faster, stronger. Immediately before your workout, honestly, within the first or the 60 to 90 minutes before your workout, I wouldn't say a high protein intake would benefit you, and actually it might hinder you.
mm,
Protein takes quite a bit of time to break down. And it's so, especially if you're someone that might get a little gastrointestinal upset while
yeah.
you're, say, running or working out, it'd be important to eat something that breaks down much quicker and
Hmm.
easier and gives you energy. And that's really carbohydrate.
Okay, I was just saying
So
such as what would be an example. Mm-hmm.
yeah, one of my favorites is actually a banana, just an
Mm-hmm.
easy digestible fruit. Um, I have young boys, you know that, so I love taking their little like squeezy pouches of
Mm-hmm.
applesauce.
Mm-hmm.
Some people just cannot tolerate solids, and
Mm-hmm.
so like a Gatorade or a juice might be really easy. But on the flip side, I think what you're getting to is immediately post workout your glycogen, so all your glucose, your
Yeah.
energy has been drained. So you need some carbohydrate, but you also have quite a bit of muscle breakdown, whether it was high intensity, whether it was strength. And so you also need to pair that carbohydrate with protein. And so that's where it would be important to get that, 20, maybe 30, and probably for your male listeners, 40 grams of protein post workout.
So would you say like peanut butter sandwich or like a glass of milk with whey or no? Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
yeah.
that's
Oh, I
awesome.
thought
I
you're
love
like
it.
you're like
I love it.
no. I'm like okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like what are some examples for my listeners listening like after they've done and let's define a high intensity. So you're saying one where you're sweating a lot, you've really exerted yourself. We're talking more than just a 30-minute walk around the block here. I'm not going to go ahead and like high protein after my slow walk around my neighborhood.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and again, the lay persons, you don't have any gadgets and gizmos to measure.
Mhm.
You finish your maybe 45, 60-minute workout and you can't speak. That would be your really high intensity.
Mhm.
Or maybe you're breathing really heavily, you can speak a little bit, but you've kind of got to sit down and stretch or
Mhm.
some of those things to look at. That would be where you're replenishing. And I think you gave great examples. The peanut butter and jelly sandwich, even the basic chocolate milk. Maybe you don't have extra protein powder to put in there.
Okay, that's great. One another thing, I just love having these conversations. I'm like, here's another question I have. There's a misconception I find between what a good carb and a bad carb is, and you had mentioned carbs, so I'd like to kind of sneak the importance of carbs in our diet, and kind of take away the fear because I think especially for my female audience, we're like, oh, carbs bad. Can we talk about that?
Yeah. So carbohydrates are the main energy source for your body. Uh, Ultimately, carbohydrates are broken down into glucose, so blood sugar. And that's really the only thing that can cross that blood-brain barrier to give you energy to just think, um, do your everyday activities. Um, if there's an excess of glucose, which is where I think it's gotten the bad rap, it's actually stored as fat.
Mm.
And so in our society, glucose is, especially in America, glucose is readily available, easy to find, in liquid beverage form that we can just, get from a machine outside of our office. And so if we have too much of that, it's easily stored as fat. And then and some of the health risks or comorbidities kind of follow that increased fat storage. And that kind of goes into the good versus bad carbohydrate question that you had. So, I think different people feel different ways about kind of putting things into a good category or a bad category. And my true belief is that 80-20, 80% of the time, I want you to choose those quote unquote good foods. And then 20% of the time, allow your body to, allow your body, your mind to enjoy things that might be termed bad.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were to put them into that good and the bad category, good carbohydrates would be things that are higher in fiber, take a little bit longer to digest, give you that glucose or that energy over a long period of time, might have more micronutrients in them. So you're thinking your vitamins and your minerals, your antioxidants, versus those bad carbohydrates might be digested really, really quickly. They may just be that glucose, sugar, table sugar. I'm thinking more of like those sodas that have no vitamins, no minerals, no other health benefit other than that immediate energy boost. Some people, we talked about that, apple juice or the apple sauce right before working out. Some people might need that immediate blood glucose, but most people don't, because they're doing what you and I are doing right now, where they're sitting down, they're chatting. They don't quite need a lot of immediate energy availability. Some good examples of good carbohydrate might be your whole fruits, your whole vegetables, whole grains. And then, as we kind of alluded to, some of the examples of maybe the bad carbohydrates would be like your Halloween candy that's still sitting around, maybe a juice or a soda.
And is that because it like spikes your glucose, which is your sugar? It spikes it up, and then what happens? It just stores anything that doesn't get used, or it just drops? Like, why do we think of it as a bad, quote unquote?
Yeah, no, great question. So, an easily digestible, something that doesn't have maybe fiber or protein to slow down that digestion in our stomach, will immediately get to that small part of the first part of our intestine, our small intestine, be absorbed right into the bloodstream, and then its transporter, insulin, will come pick it up and bring it to our cells that need it. So maybe our brain, maybe our muscles. But again, if our brain says, oh, I have enough glucose, if our muscles say we have enough, glycogen storage, if our liver has stored enough glycogen, then it needs to find another place to bring that sugar. And so that's when it's stored as that fat.
Wow. So you could have like a piece of chocolate and that's totally fine every so often. But if you're eating like the whole chocolate bar and your body's like, okay, I got enough of what I need, then the excess will be stored unless you just immediately go run and burn it all off.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why, carbohydrate before your workout is so great. Maybe you crave whatever that Halloween candy is, or the holiday treats. Maybe you use that as your motivation to then go for a walk or run or some kind of exercise.
So how does that differ from, like, let's say you use eggplant. Let's say eggplant, which is I would imagine a good carb, correct?
Mm-hmm.
How does that differ? Is it because it's digested more slowly into our system? How is it that that's not converted immediately into fat?
Not only is it digested more slowly, so the actual starchy portion that our bodies can use, the fiber in some of those fruits and vegetables, specifically eggplant, our bodies can't break down. And it tries really, really hard. It's churning and it's really trying to pull energy out of it. So it's almost like a double whammy. Is it's decreasing the time that increasing the time that the carbohydrate is flowing into our bloodstream, but it's also burning a little bit of energy. So it's almost like this thermic effect of food when you have high fiber foods. And then, the fiber on top of that also helps to feed the microorganisms in your gut as well. So fresh fruits and vegetables are so good for so many different reasons and are really that what you would consider that good carbohydrate.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much for answering all these. This is like I'm
Yeah.
absolutely blown away by all of this. I think it's so important for us to understand how all of these things kind of fit together versus, like you said, like categorizing like this is bad and this is good. Well, actually, if you understand what actually quote unquote bad is, it might make it easier for you to be like, you know what, I'm going to eat that donut, chocolate, whatever it is every so often, and just kind of being aware. Speaking of awareness, I want to take a few moments to share a bit about Aether Beauty, one of my absolute favorite zero waste, natural, ethically and sustainably sourced and created makeup brands. To be honest, for the past 3 years, I rarely wore makeup. Not because I didn't love it, but because I just couldn't find a brand that met all my prerequisites. Now, I am really low maintenance when it comes to beauty and skincare, but there are certain shortcuts I'm just not willing to make, especially when it comes to human rights, environmental conservation, and, of course, my own health. I've explored and tested so many different makeup brands and found some really great ones, but none have inspired me as much as Aether Beauty. Now, I know it sounds weird to feel inspired by your makeup brand, but hear me out. Tyla Abbott, the founder of Aether Beauty, has created a makeup brand that uses only ethically and sustainably sourced ingredients, including mica, is ethically manufactured, plastic-free, and 100% recyclable, non-toxic, vegan, certified organic, and most importantly, is one of the best eyeshadows I've ever used. Think MAC-like textures and colors, but non-toxic and ethically made every single step of the way. The Wise Consumer is absolutely not sponsored by Aether Beauty. I just love this brand, its mission, and I'm a huge fan of Tyla. I actually interviewed her in episode 54 of the podcast if you want to hear more about her journey and mission. So if you're looking for a makeup brand that has gone above and beyond to be sustainable and ethical, free of questionable ingredients, and that actually works, check out aetherbeautyco.com. That's AETHER beautyco.com and receive 20% off any one purchase using code WISELOVE. WISELOVE. Again, that's aetherbeautyco.com, code WISELOVE. All right, back to the show. So let's talk about eggs because again, going through my fertility journey, one of the things that keeps popping up in almost everything I've read is women should be adding more eggs to their diet. Selenium is one of those things they keep talking about, and I would love to understand why eggs and what is selenium.
Yeah. So honestly, eggs are like the most nutritious food on the planet. I mean, if you can have something that's that quite literally makes another organism, then it probably has all of the nutrients that you would need as well. It has your vitamin A, your folate. So again, important for the that journey that you're on, the fertility journey. B vitamins, selenium, protein, fat. So really, really good. Your selenium. Yeah. So we're looking at immune boosting. We're looking at selenium helps with, mental fog. It's really helped to decrease mortality rates. So it's that micronutrient, that mineral that's involved in a lot of enzymatic processes in our body that we might take for granted if we're not getting enough of it. Now I can say if you're consuming eggs, if you're consuming meat products, you're likely getting selenium. If you're consuming grains that have been enriched, you're getting selenium. If you're on a prenatal vitamin, you're getting selenium in there. So it may not be something that you need to sit down and calculate
Mm-hmm.
and be super concerned about. But as long as you're, again, getting that, wide breadth of whole foods, then you're likely meeting those selenium needs.
I feel like that's a common thread in this conversation so far is that me, because I'm such a nerd, I'm like, okay, I need to make sure I'm getting the right percentage of daily values of selenium, of leucine, of this and that. And actually, probably what the healthier way of looking or the easier way of looking at this is looking at it like whole food diet. And what honestly, it's the way that I think the Mother Nature, what she has to offer us. When I think of food as that, it takes away a lot of it, and listening intuitively to what my body needs. Because there are times like right before my period too, where I'm like, oh my gosh, I absolutely want kimchi, or I absolutely need, like, I crave seaweed before and during my period, which I thought was the weirdest thing until I started researching that you should actually be including those foods during your period, which I'll talk about on other follow-up
Yeah.
episodes because it's fascinating. So I'm like huge into intuitive like eating. But I think if we break it down as like the average person who's busy, just trying to live a normal, healthy life, like what has our earth given us? Chickens and eggs and liver and grains and, whatever it is, and take the processed stuff out. I think that's one way of looking at nutrition, I believe, that just would make it so much
Yeah.
easier for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And for, like, especially my um, families are busy,
Yeah.
especially nowadays. And the act of meal planning is, it can be really stressful. Um, and so I just say, like, let's break it down to your 3 meals a day. Let's make a plate. I have people make a circle on their page, and then let's have your fruits and your vegetables and your grains and maybe some form of protein, whether it be mixing that grain with legumes or putting an egg or chicken on that plate too. And that's kind of how we design these plates. And then once people start to do that, I can break down the science for them, and I can say by having these 3 really well balanced meals and maybe a snack in there, depending on your activity level, they see that they're meeting all of their nutrient needs, their family's nutrient needs, and they don't need to be as concerned. They can be more intuitive,
Mhm.
like you're saying.
Do you recommend people, the average person, takes supplements in addition to? Because I think it's great if you can work with a nutritionist who could be like, now you're actually meeting all of it. But what I realized when I was doing the vegan thing for a while is like I wasn't meeting all of my nutrients, and so I was taking supplements, which is why a lot of vegans have to take supplements. But the average person, do you recommend we take supplements?
Depending on the life stage that you're in, and I know, we've talked about a lot of nutrition and fertility, and
Mm-hmm.
very, very important to consider a prenatal vitamin. Honestly, the average person, if you're eating a well balanced diet, those 3 meals a day, maybe a snack or two, and you're getting foods from each of the various food groups, you don't need a supplement. Um, Especially if, like, say, you're getting all of your calorie needs, which, maybe consider journaling for a couple days, not making it, an everyday thing, to see if you're meeting all your calorie needs. You don't need a supplement then. It's if maybe you're trying a new um, diet, maybe you're in a different life stage, maybe you're trying to build more muscle and you're having a hard time meeting those calorie demands. A supplement might be um, important.
So with COVID going on, I'm thinking of, okay, let's say you're eating 3 meals a day, but I also have chatted with a lot of folks recently with COVID, and God bless all of us during this time where we're like, we're eating 3 meals a day, but we're buying all of our meals. We're not making anything. So can you get all the nutrients you need in a healthy way if you're eating out all the time without knowing necessarily what they're using and cooking their foods in or what they're adding or not adding?
That's a great question. I truly believe that you can. And again, I think it's just knowing that the basic breakdown of food groups, and then, the nutrients in those food groups, whether they be macronutrients or micronutrients. Um, you can go to any restaurant and the chef would be happy to make, chicken, rice, and broccoli. And then you have, your vegetables, you have your grains, you have that protein. So I think it's just important for people to like recognize that. And I keep coming back to it, but I love for people to just draw that plate. And draw that plate for breakfast, draw that plate for lunch, draw that plate for dinner, break it down into, thirds or quarters. And then remember those activities that you did in like preschool and kindergarten and first grade of, the various fruits and vegetables and carbohydrates and, or grains, and then, and proteins, draw that. And then just, that's what you're ordering when you're ordering out, for dinner or lunch or breakfast, and make it consistent.
Why do we make it so hard for ourselves to eat healthy? Because it sounds so simple when you put it that way. But then in my head, I'm like I was saying, I feel like this is my takeaway. Like, just be chill about it, Maddie. Like, I know I nerd out about it, but when you put it this way, it's like, oh, it's so easy. And yet it's so easy. And yet so many of us, I hate using the word wrong, but we do it wrong. It's like, it's so easy and yet so hard to eat healthy.
I mean, there's a whole bunch of factors in that question. To me, the biggest one is the diet, the health, the wellness industry is like a billions of dollars a year industry where we're constantly putting out information. And you're busy, I'm busy, people are busy, so they see that information and they kind of get confused. Where do I put that in? So that's one thing. Two, again, it goes back to that busy thing, planning and just what is convenient. And although we might know, choosing, I don't know, say you're ordering something easy, like an easy fast food pizza, choosing the salad plus the pizza would be better than the pizza and the fries. Yeah. But maybe it's cheaper. Maybe it's just easier. Where it was put on the menu, you saw the fries first and then the pizza and then the salads were all the way down on the bottom. I think there's a whole bunch of factors in that too. There's also, I'd love to see, I know you're doing a lot of research on this too, is diet quality and mental health, reducing anxiety, reducing stress, reducing, inflammation. And they actually, some of the research that I've read shows that some of these more available foods, specifically the bad carbohydrates that we were talking about, the sodas, the pizzas, that actually, the effect in our brain is so mood boosting initially that we want to keep eating that. Versus it takes a little bit longer with some of these healthier carbohydrates because the actual physiologic, like we're breaking it down, the fiber slowing the digestion, we don't get that immediate mood boost of the chocolate or the, you name it, the soda.
Yeah, we're like, pizza.
Pizza. Just thinking about it makes people really happy.
I love pizza. Like Friday nights in our household, it's pizza. Granted, it is vegan pizza because my husband's even more vegan than I am, but he prefers not having cheese. So I'll get like the pepperoni or something and I'll add it to our pizza. But yeah, it's really hard in our world too, because especially right now with COVID, if you're a busy mom and you've got your kids, trying to figure out how are you going to eat? When are you going to eat? Do you have to cook? It does take time. And so it is easier. Not to mention, for a lot of people think that it's, I've actually done research on this and they're finding that it's actually cheaper to make your own food than buying out all the time. But, initially, when you look at a bill and you go to the grocery store, you're like, oh man, that comes out to like $50 for like the lentils and the this and the that, versus my Big Mac came out to like $3.99. But over time, not to mention the health benefits in the long run, which is a conversation for another day. But over time, I think if you do make your food, it is healthier, but it does take more time. Yeah. And I think that's why I love the way that you're saying, like, approach it in like just a simple way. Get your 4 basic things. Are you eating your greens? Are you eating your, you can even, and everyone knows I'm super into like zero waste and everything. And I would absolutely love it if all of us could be like making food from bulk. But I also realize if you get a pack of rice and you put it in the microwave for 1 minute and 30 seconds, it's way faster than having to soak and steam and boil, blah, 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 blah. So you got to do what's best for you, you know? And there's no judgments here. It's just I'm trying to inform people like, here are good things you can do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Maddie, your heart is absolutely in the right place. And I love that you kind of alluded to it at the beginning of our conversation was you're coming up with toolkits. And that's really what people need is not just the recipes, but also the science behind it and also the easy how-tos. When you have a little bit more time, what can you prepare ahead of time? Because you're absolutely right. Like different life stages really put you in situations where my husband and I like to call it the buffer life, where like we know we're going to have a really, really busy week. We're very fortunate that we both have jobs. And so that week we might either order out a little bit more. We might make, like our favorite grocery stores make the like pre-packaged meals that have the vegetable and the starch and the protein. We just buy a couple of those. We are very fortunate that we can afford those because they can be more expensive. But yeah, sometimes you're in that buffer life stage.
Where you're like, oh, pre-made meals, get it. Yeah. And that's not even, and Kathleen and I will talk about, Kathleen's going to be part of my toolkit course here coming out, but not even talk about kids who won't eat certain foods, so then you add like some kids are picky eaters and won't even make what I make. Or anyway, Kathleen, this hour is flying by way too fast and I want to be mindful of your time, but we could go into so many different things and I absolutely love this. Is there anything before I let you go that maybe your clients ask a lot, or some people, or research that you've done that you think is really important to impart with my listeners?
So I think there's one question that you and I had talked about prior to me coming on your podcast today, which is it was kind of revolved around diets. And I think your question was like, if proteins are so essential for our bodies, can we ignore other foods?
Oh, yeah.
And then you specifically asked, what about those people that are on paleo or they're on ketogenic diets?
Or carnivore. I just read about this guy who only eats meat. Meat. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yes. And ultimately, protein can be broken down through deamination into carbohydrates. So then you're getting the protein, you're getting the carbohydrate, and then he's a carnivore. Those meats are going to have fat in them, so he's getting that fat too. They're going to have micronutrients as well. But the question I get the most is people come to me with these various diets, like you're saying, carnivore, all of that. And they really ask me the pros and cons of those diets. And so that's kind of what I just wanted to like talk about for a little bit is whatever diet you choose, and especially that stage of life that we were talking about, you want it to be something that you're able to sustain. If you have something that has such stringent restrictions that you can't have your family over for Thanksgiving, and we'll talk about a different year. If you can't go out with your friends, if you and your spouse are on a completely different diet, that might be something that you consider. If you're on a diet that's so restrictive that you're not getting enough calories, you might be nutrient deficient, some of those micronutrients, and you're starting to see that maybe in your cognition and how you're thinking, your fatigue levels. Maybe you can't make it to the end of the workout. That might be something you consider looking at the type of diet you're on. And then ultimately just looking at health risks down the road, specifically with those high protein, the carnivore diet, the ketogenic diet. Something that you might hear a lot about in the news is kidney issues, and really related to maybe not just too much protein, but dehydration. Because if you think about it, carbohydrate holds in water in your body. And if you've eliminated a large portion of your carbohydrate, you're not holding in as much water, even if you're drinking a ton. And then, ultimately the other thing I think about is food obsession. So, whatever life stage you're in, we don't want food to become such an obsession that that's what you're thinking about all the time. And it brings it back to exactly what you believe in is intuitive eating. You eat when you're hungry, you stop when you're full. If you're planning for a family, you're thinking about food when you're meal planning or you're prepping it. But other than that, enjoying life outside of
Mm-hmm.
food.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think it is really hard, I will say, in the US specifically, with the standard American diet is not the best. And yet so many of us eat the standard American diet. And I think more and more we're starting to realize the impact, the chronic impact it has on us. Over obesity, insulin, anti-inflammatory, chronic diseases. And I think slowly but surely, things are starting to shift, which is like
Mhm.
very, it's a positive sign. So yeah, anyway, I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, it's just,
No, I think you're right. And it's interesting what, talking about nutrition during a pandemic.
yeah.
Um,
Mm.
and I think what you're kind of getting at is the things shifting. People see the importance of whether it be wearing the mask, washing their hands, staying 6 feet apart, but they also see the importance of like, wow, for my mental health, I need to exercise.
Mm-hmm.
For my physical health, I need to exercise, and I also need to eat well. Sleep, so important. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think you're right. There is a shift, and it's unfortunate that maybe it's related to what's currently going on, or maybe it's something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, Kathleen, this has just been amazing. I really appreciate your time today. Good luck with everything, and thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me, Maddie. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, friend, that about wraps it up, but this convo does not have to end here. I would love to hear from you, so please send your questions and comments my way. And if there's a topic you want to hear more about, send me a DM on Instagram at The Wise Consumer or email me at hello@thewiseconsumer.com and let's chat. In the meantime, could I ask you to do me a huge favor, please? I'd really appreciate it if you could take a few minutes out of your day to subscribe to my show and leave me a review if you haven't already. You can do so in the iTunes app. It's that purple icon that comes preloaded on most smartphones, but I've also linked it up in the show notes if you're not sure how to access it. Anyway, that wraps it up for today. So until next time, friend, be safe, stay healthy, and take care. Hi, friends. As always, just ending this episode with my obligatory disclaimer. Please remember, the Wise Consumer is intended for educational purposes only. The content being shared here should not be used as a substitute for professional care by your healthcare provider. I am not a qualified medical expert, nor do I pretend to be, so please note that the content and research I share and explore on this podcast is not intended to treat or diagnose you. If you have any medical questions, concerns, or wish to make changes to your diet, please speak to your physician or any qualified healthcare professional for that matter. The Wise Consumer may not be held responsible for your health, dietary, or lifestyle decisions. I am simply here to encourage you to seek healthier, more eco-friendly, and conscious alternatives. While the Wise Consumer podcast offers information from many sources, the opinions expressed are solely those of the Wise Consumer and not those of any affiliate or other entity. Additionally, while I always do my best to source and research the most up-to-date and accurate information, I realize science is continually evolving. If you come across any scientific information that is blatantly incorrect, please kindly email me at hello@thewiseconsumer.com. And finally, this podcast and any other offerings of The Wise Consumer may contain copyrighted material, the use of which has not always been specifically authorized by the copyright owner because it is being used for educational purposes. If you wish to use copyrighted material from this podcast or any other offerings of The Wise Consumer for purposes of your own that go beyond fair use, you must obtain permission from the copyright owner.